The rain hammered against the windshield of David Chen's delivery van with the fury of 1,000 drummers, each drop exploding like liquid bullets against the glass. Through the chaos of the storm, he could barely make out the towering glass facade of the Meridian Grand Hotel, its elegant entrance now a beacon of warm light cutting through the tempest that had descended upon downtown Seattle like a vengeful giant. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Lightning split the darkened sky, illuminating the scene for a split second. Palm trees bent nearly horizontal, debris flying through the air like missiles, and a single figure in an emerald evening gown standing beneath the hotel's covered entrance, her phone pressed desperately to her ear. Even from 50 yards away, David could see the panic in her posture, the way her free hand gestured frantically at the empty loading dock where 3 catering trucks should have been. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the steering wheel, calculating the risk. The National Weather Service had issued warnings all afternoon. Hurricane Miranda, downgraded to a tropical storm, but still packing 70-mile-per-hour winds, had shifted course at the last minute, catching the entire Pacific Northwest off guard. Every sensible delivery driver had called it quits hours ago, retreating to safety while David Chen pressed forward through streets that looked more like rivers, driven by something deeper than professional obligation. In the passenger seat, his phone buzzed with the text message that had started this whole impossible journey. Urgent, need immediate delivery to Meridian Grand, wedding tomorrow. Will pay triple rate. Lives depend on this. The message had come from Isabella Moreau, a name that meant nothing to David when he first read it, but everything to the woman in the emerald dress who was about to discover that sometimes salvation arrives in the most unexpected packages. David Chen had been delivering food for Rapid Eats for 8 months, a job that paid just enough to cover rent on their small apartment in Georgetown and keep his 7-year-old daughter Lily in the after-school program at Madison Elementary. At 34, he possessed the kind of lean, efficient build that came from years of carrying heavy loads and navigating tight spaces. His movements economical and purposeful, even when performing the most mundane tasks. The navy blue Rapid Eats polo shirt and khaki pants he wore were always meticulously clean, a small pride he maintained despite the chaos that had become his daily existence since the divorce 2 years ago. The apartment he shared with Lily was sparse but warm, decorated with her artwork taped to the refrigerator and photographs from happier times arranged carefully on the bookshelf. Every evening at 6:30, David would hang his delivery bag by the door, wash his hands with the thoroughness of a surgeon, and transform completely into the role that mattered most, Dad. Tonight should have been no different, except for the storm that had turned Seattle into a disaster zone and the desperate plea from a stranger that he couldn't ignore. The Meridian Grand Hotel represented everything David's world was not. Rising 43 stories above Elliott Bay, it was a monument to luxury and excess, where a single night's stay cost more than he made in a month. The lobby alone, with its soaring ceilings and hand-blown glass chandeliers, could have housed his entire apartment building. Yet here he was, threading his delivery van through abandoned streets and around fallen trees, carrying what he had been told was the most important order of his career. The woman who had sent the urgent message was Isabella Moreau, though David wouldn't learn her name until much later. At 29, she had built Moreau Events into the most prestigious wedding planning company on the West Coast, orchestrating celebrations for tech billionaires, movie stars, and political dynasties. Her own appearance was as carefully curated as her events, shoulder-length auburn hair that caught the light at precisely the right angles, a tailored wardrobe that whispered wealth rather than shouting it, and a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. But tonight, standing beneath the hotel's glass canopy while Hurricane Miranda tore through the city, Isabella Moreau looked like a general watching her army desert before the most important battle of her career. The wedding she had spent 18 months planning, a $10 million extravaganza that would cement her reputation as the premier event planner in the country, was falling apart one catastrophic phone call at a time. The bride was Charlotte Ashford, daughter of technology mogul Harrison Ashford, whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. The groom was Philippe Duboubou, a French vineyard heir whose family owned estates throughout Bordeaux and Champagne. Their union would merge two empires, and Isabella had been tasked with creating a celebration worthy of such significance. The guest list read like a Forbes magazine cover story. 500 of the world's most influential people, all expecting perfection. The main ceremony was scheduled for tomorrow evening in the hotel's Crown Ballroom, a space that could accommodate royalty and frequently did. Isabella had spent months coordinating every detail. Orchids flown in from Thailand, a string quartet from the Vienna Philharmonic, champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's monthly salary. The dinner menu alone had required 14 tastings and the approval of 3 Michelin-starred chefs. But storms, Isabella was learning, were indifferent to money and influence. The catering company's trucks had been trapped by flooding on the other side of Lake Washington. The florist's delivery van had been crushed by a falling oak tree on Capitol Hill. Half the musicians were stranded at SeaTac Airport, their flights indefinitely delayed. The cake, a 7-tier masterpiece that had taken a team of pastry chefs 3 days to create, was sitting in a bakery in Bellevue with no way to reach the hotel. David's delivery contained what Isabella hoped might salvage the disaster: emergency appetizers from Luna's Bistro, one of the few restaurants still operating in the storm. It wasn't much, barely enough to feed 50 people, but it represented something more valuable than food. It represented hope, delivered by a man willing to risk everything for reasons he couldn't entirely explain. The van's engine coughed as David navigated around an overturned city bus, its hazard lights still blinking uselessly in the storm. He had driven through dangerous conditions before, during his previous life as a logistics coordinator for humanitarian relief operations, but never in civilian circumstances. Never for a job that paid $12 an hour plus tips. Something about the desperation in that text message had triggered instincts he thought he had left behind. The need to complete the mission regardless of personal risk. His phone rang, Lily's contact photo lighting up the screen. A gap-toothed smile beneath pigtails that refused to stay neat despite his best efforts each morning. He answered on speaker, his eyes never leaving the treacherous road ahead. "Daddy, Mrs. Kim says the power went out at school, and they're keeping all the kids here until parents can pick us up safely." Lily's voice carried the forced bravery of a child trying not to sound scared. "I told her you were working and might be late." David's heart clenched. Mrs. Kim ran the after-school program with the efficiency of a military operation and the warmth of a favorite grandmother. She would keep Lily safe, he knew, but the thought of his daughter waiting in a dark building while he risked his life for strangers. Appetizers felt like a betrayal of everything he had promised when he became a single father. "I'm finishing. One more delivery, sweet pea, and then I'm coming straight to get you," he said, taking a corner so slowly that his van barely registered the turn. "Mrs. Kim has flashlights and snacks, right?" "Yeah. And Tommy brought his tablet, and it still has battery, so we're watching movies," Lily replied, her voice brightening slightly. "But Daddy, the storm sounds really scary. Are you being careful?" David glanced at the chaos outside his windows, at the debris flying through the air and the trees bending like grass in the wind, and made a conscious choice to lie. "Just a little rain, kiddo. Nothing your old dad can't handle." After they hung up, David sat for a moment in the relative calm of his van, listening to the storm rage around him. He could turn around right now, forfeit the delivery fee, and collect his daughter from the school. It would be the sensible choice, the safe choice, the choice that any rational single father would make. Instead, he put the van in drive and continued toward the Meridian Grand, pulled forward by an obligation he couldn't name to a woman he had never met. The hotel's loading dock was completely flooded, forcing David to park at the main entrance where a uniformed doorman waited with an oversized umbrella and the resigned expression of someone paid to remain courteous under impossible circumstances. David grabbed the insulated delivery bags from the passenger seat, their contents representing what felt like a pathetically small response to the magnitude of the crisis he was witnessing. Isabella Moreau appeared before he had taken 3 steps from his van, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to high-pressure situations. Up close, she was even more striking than she had appeared from a distance, but David's attention was immediately drawn to her eyes, intelligent, determined, and filled with the kind of desperation that comes when everything you've worked for hangs in the balance. "You're from Rapid Eats?" she asked, though his uniform made the question unnecessary. Her voice carried a slight French accent, a remnant of childhood years spent in her grandmother's chateau in Provence, though she had spent most of her adult life carefully minimizing it for American business meetings. David nodded, extending the delivery bags toward her. "Isabella Moreau? I have your order from Luna's Bistro." She accepted the bags with hands that trembled slightly, though whether from cold, exhaustion, or emotion, David couldn't tell. "I can't believe you made it through this storm. The other drivers all canceled hours ago." It seemed important. David replied simply, the understatement of the century delivered in the same tone he might use to comment on the weather. Isabella looked at him more carefully then, taking in the calm competence in his movements, the way his eyes automatically scanned their surroundings for potential hazards, the fact that he had arrived when everyone else had given up. There was something about this delivery driver that didn't quite fit the usual pattern, though she couldn't identify what it was. "Would you mind helping me get these upstairs?" she asked, then quickly added, "I'll pay you extra, of course. It's just that my staff is dealing with other emergencies, and these need to get to the kitchen immediately." David glanced back at his van, thinking of Lily waiting at school, then nodded. "Lead the way." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor passed in silence, both of them lost in their respective thoughts. Isabella was mentally calculating how many disasters she could reasonably address before the morning brought fresh catastrophes, while David found himself wondering what kind of event required emergency appetizers during a hurricane. The answer became clear the moment the elevator doors opened. The Crown Ballroom was a testament to human ambition and Isabella's extraordinary vision. Even in its current state of organized chaos, with staff members rushing between tables draped in ivory silk and centerpieces that resembled small forests of rare orchids, the space radiated elegance and sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across walls decorated with hand-painted murals depicting scenes from French vineyards, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Elliott Bay and the storm raging beyond the glass. But it was the scale of the operation that truly struck David. 500 place settings arranged with military precision, each table a masterpiece of design that probably cost more than his annual salary. A small army of servers, florists, and technicians moved through the space with practiced efficiency, their movements choreographed like a complex ballet despite the visible stress on every face. $10 million, Isabella said quietly, noticing his expression. "That's what this wedding cost. And right now, I'm not sure we'll have enough food to feed 100 people, let alone 500. David set the delivery bags on a service table near the kitchen entrance, but instead of leaving immediately, he found himself studying the logistics of the operation with the eye of someone who had once coordinated supply chains in far more challenging circumstances. The problem wasn't just the missing food, he realized, but the entire sequence of service that had been disrupted by the storm's timing. "How many people are you expecting tomorrow?" he asked, the question emerging before he had consciously decided to get involved. 487 confirmed guests, plus staff, Isabella replied, surprised by his interest. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be tonight for immediate family, about 50 people, but even that's falling apart. David nodded, his mind automatically calculating portions, timing, and logistics. It was a habit he had developed during his previous career, the ability to see complex operations as puzzles that could be solved with the right combination of resources and planning. He walked to the windows, looking out at the storm that showed no signs of abating, then turned back to Isabella with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What if I told you I might be able to help?" he said, the words surprising them both. Isabella stared at him, taking in the Rapid Eats uniform, the delivery van keys still in his hand, the complete impossibility of what he was suggesting. "You're a food delivery driver," she said, not unkindly but with the bewilderment of someone whose world had been turned upside down too many times in one day. "I'm a lot of things," David replied, and in that simple statement, Isabella heard something that made her reconsider her assumptions about the man who had driven through a hurricane to deliver $40 worth of appetizers. The next hour unfolded like a revelation wrapped in crisis management. David called his former colleagues at Northwest Logistics, people who owed him favors from the years before. His life had been reduced to delivery routes and custody schedules. Within minutes, he had mapped out alternative supply routes that bypassed the flooded areas, identified restaurants and suppliers who were still operational, and began coordinating a network of drivers willing to risk the storm for premium compensation. Isabella watched in fascination as the quiet delivery driver transformed into something else entirely. His phone calls conducted with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding resources and solving impossible problems. He spoke to wholesale food distributors with the familiarity of an industry insider, negotiated with transportation companies using terminology she barely understood, and displayed a knowledge of event logistics that rivaled her own. "The main catering truck is still stuck, but I can get emergency supplies from 3 different sources," David explained, showing her a hand-drawn diagram of delivery routes and timing that looked like a military operation. "It won't be the original menu, but it'll be good food, properly prepared and served on time." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "How is this possible?" Isabella asked, still struggling to reconcile the man before her with the assumptions she had made based on his uniform. David was quiet for a moment, looking out at the storm that continued to rage beyond the windows. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a story he rarely told. "I used to coordinate humanitarian supply chains in disaster zones," he said simply. "Before my daughter was born, before my marriage fell apart, before I discovered that being good at logistics doesn't automatically make you good at being a husband or father." The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that transformed the entire dynamic of their interaction. Isabella realized she was looking at someone who had voluntarily stepped away from a career that matched his skills to focus on the thing that mattered most to him, being present for his child. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, genuinely curious about the motivations of a man who was risking everything for a stranger's event. David considered the question, thinking of Lily waiting at school, of the $10 million wedding that represented someone else's dream, of the text message that had contained more desperation than he had initially recognized. "Because sometimes the most important deliveries aren't the ones that pay the most," he said finally. "And because everyone deserves to have their special day go right, even if they can afford things I'll never be able to give my daughter." It was a simple answer, but it contained depths that Isabella found herself wanting to explore. Here was a man who had walked away from success to deliver food for $12 an hour, not because he had failed, but because he had chosen different priorities. The concept was so foreign to her own experience that it felt almost revolutionary. Over the next 3 hours, David orchestrated what Isabella would later describe as the most impressive logistical operation she had ever witnessed. He coordinated deliveries from 7 different suppliers, arranged for additional kitchen staff from 2 restaurant groups, and somehow managed to source replacement ingredients for dishes that had seemed impossible to recreate on such short notice. But more than that, he restored Isabella's faith in the possibility of success. Where she had seen insurmountable problems, he saw solvable challenges. Where she had felt overwhelmed by the scope of the disaster, he brought calm competence and the kind of steady leadership that transforms chaos into order. As the storm began to weaken in the early hours of morning and the first emergency deliveries arrived exactly on schedule, Isabella found herself looking at David Chen with something that went beyond professional gratitude. She was looking at him with the recognition that some people possess qualities that have nothing to do with their circumstances and everything to do with who they choose to be when tested. The wedding was going to happen, she realized, not exactly as planned, but perhaps even better for having been salvaged through the efforts of someone who had no reason to care except for his own inherent decency. And for the first time in 18 months of planning the event, Isabella understood that the most important element had never been the $10 million spent on decorations and luxury. It had been the willingness of one person to show up when everyone else had given up, to risk everything for nothing more than the promise that tomorrow would be better than today. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Crown Ballroom, revealing a space transformed by crisis into something unexpectedly beautiful. David stood near the service entrance, watching Isabella direct the final preparations. With the precision of a conductor orchestrating a symphony, the emergency flowers, sourced from 3 different suppliers across the city, created arrangements that were somehow more organic and stunning than the original Thai orchids would have been. The replacement menu, crafted from ingredients that had arrived throughout the night, promised flavors that honored both the couple's heritage and the Pacific Northwest's bounty. Isabella moved through the space with renewed energy, her emerald dress replaced by a crisp white suit that made her look like a general preparing for a decisive battle. Every gesture was purposeful, every conversation brief but comprehensive. Yet David noticed how her gaze found him repeatedly across the crowded ballroom. There was something in her expression that hadn't been there during the storm, a curiosity that went beyond professional gratitude. The bride and groom had arrived an hour earlier. Charlotte Ashford's initial panic at the menu changes dissolving into genuine excitement as Isabella explained how the crisis had created opportunities for more personal touches. Philippe Dubois, whose family vineyard had weathered countless natural disasters over the centuries, simply smiled and declared that the best celebrations always contained elements of improvisation. Their reaction validated what David had suspected. During the long night of coordination, sometimes the most memorable moments emerged from chaos rather than careful planning. David's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Kim at the after-school program. Lily was fine, excited to tell him about the adventure of spending the night at school, but asking when he would pick her up. The guilt he had been suppressing throughout the emergency logistics suddenly crashed over him like a delayed wave. He had spent the night saving a stranger's $10 million wedding while his 7-year-old daughter slept on a cot in a classroom, wondering where her father was. Isabella appeared beside him as if summoned by his distress, her ability to read situations extending beyond event planning into human emotions. "Your daughter," she said simply, not needing him to explain the source of his sudden tension. "I need to pick her up," David replied, already reaching for his van keys. "The wedding is in good shape now. You don't need me anymore." Isabella placed a gentle hand on his arm, stopping him mid-motion. "Actually, I do need you. But not here." She paused, studying his face with the same intensity she applied to complex logistical challenges. "Bring Lily here. I want to meet the person who raised someone willing to drive through a hurricane for strangers. The offer surprised David in ways he couldn't immediately articulate. His worlds had been carefully separated since the divorce. Work in one compartment, fatherhood in another, with no overlap that might complicate either responsibility. The idea of bringing Lily into Isabella's rarefied universe felt like crossing a bridge he had never intended to build. "She's 7, he said, as if that explained everything. "This is a $10 million wedding with 500 guests who probably own small countries." Isabella smiled, the expression transforming her face from beautiful to radiant. Then she fit right in. Children have a way of putting even billionaires in their proper perspective. An hour later, David returned to the Meridian Grand with Lily in tow, her gap-toothed grin hidden behind unusually wide eyes as she took in the hotel's opulent lobby. She wore her favorite dress, a bright yellow sundress decorated with purple butterflies that she had insisted on pairing with polka-dotted tights and red sneakers. The combination should have clashed horribly, but somehow achieved the kind of joyful defiance of convention that only children could master. "Daddy, is this where princesses live?" Lily whispered as they rode the elevator to the 42nd floor, her small hand gripping his with excitement rather than nervousness. "Not princesses, sweet pea. Just people with more money than they know what to do with," David replied, then immediately regretted the cynicism in his tone. Lily didn't need his adult complications coloring her sense of wonder. The elevator doors opened to reveal Isabella waiting for them, and David watched his daughter's reaction with the fascination of a scientist observing the chemical reaction. Lily stepped forward with the confidence that came from being genuinely loved and told daily that she could accomplish anything, extending her hand with formal politeness. "Hello, I'm Lily Chen. My daddy says you're very important, and he helped you last night when it was stormy." Isabella knelt to Lily's eye level, accepting the handshake with the same seriousness she brought to negotiations with Fortune 500 executives. "Hello, Lily Chen. I'm Isabella Moreau, and your daddy saved my entire career last night. He's quite extraordinary." "I know," Lily replied matter-of-factly. "He makes the best pancakes in the whole world, and he reads all the voices different. When we do bedtime stories, what kind of career do you have?" Isabella launched into an explanation of event planning that somehow became a guided tour of the ballroom, with Lily asking questions that revealed both her intelligence and her complete lack of intimidation by wealth or sophistication. David followed a few steps behind, watching two parts of his life merge in ways he had never imagined possible. "Why did you make everything so fancy?" Lily asked, studying a centerpiece that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. "Because sometimes people want their special day to be different from every other day," Isabella explained. "When two people promise to love each other forever, they want everything around them to be as beautiful as that promise feels." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher. "My mommy and daddy promised to love each other forever, but they don't live together anymore. Does that mean the promise got broken?" The question hung in the air with the weight of childhood's ability to cut straight to the heart of adult complications. David felt his chest tighten, recognizing the confusion that Lily carried, despite his best efforts to shield her from the mésanges of divorce. Isabella's expression softened with genuine empathy rather than the awkward discomfort most adults displayed when children ask difficult questions. "Sometimes grown-ups discover that they can love each other, but not be happy living together," Isabella said gently. "That doesn't mean the promise was broken. It just means they found a different way to keep it, by making sure you know you're loved by both of them." Lily nodded slowly, processing this explanation with visible relief. "That makes sense. Daddy says love isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up when people need you." Isabella's eyes found David's across the space, and in that moment, he realized she understood something fundamental about his character that went beyond his logistic skills or his willingness to drive through storms. She saw the daily choices he made to prioritize his daughter's emotional well-being over his own convenience. The way he had rebuilt his entire life around the premise that being present mattered more than being successful. The wedding ceremony. That evening unfolded like a dream salvaged from disaster. The emergency menu exceeded everyone's expectations. The replacement flowers created a garden-like atmosphere that felt more magical than formal arrangements ever could have achieved. And the story of how the celebration had been saved by a delivery driver during a hurricane became part of the couple's mythology before the first dance had ended. David watched from the service corridor, officially present as a consultant, but actually mesmerized by Isabella's orchestration of 500 moving parts. She moved through the reception like a conductor leading an invisible orchestra, her timing perfect, her authority absolute, her joy in the success evident in every gesture. When Charlotte Ashford's grandmother, the family matriarch whose approval could make or break social reputations, declared the wedding the most memorable she had attended in 70 years, Isabella's smile could have powered the entire hotel. But it was the moment near midnight, after the last guest had departed and the cleanup crews had begun their work, that changed everything between them. Isabella found David in the service elevator, heading down to collect Lily from the staff break room, where she had fallen asleep watching movies on Isabella's assistant's tablet. "I have a proposition," Isabella said as the elevator descended. Through floors of emptying ballrooms and darkened conference rooms. David raised an eyebrow, his exhaustion making him more direct than usual. "I already have a job and I'm not looking to change careers again." Isabella laughed, a sound that contained relief, triumph, and something else that David couldn't immediately identify. "Not that kind of proposition. Though I am going to make you an offer you'll probably want to refuse." The elevator stopped at the ground floor, but neither of them moved to exit. Instead, Isabella turned to face him fully, her expression serious despite the lingering joy from the evening's success. "I want to hire you as my logistics coordinator," she said. "Not as an employee, as a partner. Moreau Events needs someone who can solve impossible problems, and you need work that matches your actual abilities instead of wasting them on $12 delivery runs." David stared at her, processing the implications of what she was suggesting. Partnership implied equality, shared risk, shared reward. It implied trust at a level he hadn't experienced since his marriage had fallen apart. "You don't know anything about me," he said finally. "Not really. You've seen me handle one crisis, but you don't know why I left my previous career, or what I'm running from, or whether I'm reliable for more than emergency situations." Isabella stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, close enough to notice that she smelled like jasmine and coffee, and the lingering excitement of a successfully executed plan. "Then tell me," she said simply. "I've built my entire business on reading people, on understanding what motivates them and what they're capable of achieving. I see someone who walked away from success because he discovered something more important than career advancement. I see someone who drives through hurricanes for strangers and coordinates million-dollar logistics while worrying about a 7-year-old's bedtime. I see someone who chose to be present for his daughter over everything else, and I've never met anyone who made that choice with such complete commitment." The elevator doors opened and closed twice while they stood in silence, David wrestling with temptation and fear in equal measure. Partnership with Isabella would mean financial security for Lily, work that engaged his mind and skills, proximity to a woman who seemed to understand him better than he understood himself. It would also mean risking the careful balance he had constructed, the safe boundaries that kept his worlds separate and manageable. "I need to think about it," he said finally, stepping out of the elevator as Lily appeared in the doorway of the break room, rubbing sleep from her eyes and clutching a stuffed elephant she had apparently acquired during the evening. Isabella nodded, not pushing despite the urgency he could see in her expression. Think about it. But David, think about this too. Some opportunities don't come twice, and some partnerships are worth the risk of changing everything. 3 days later, David sat in the small kitchen of his Georgetown apartment, helping Lily with her homework. While wrestling with the decision that had consumed his thoughts since Isabella's offer, the partnership papers sat on the counter beside a stack of unpaid bills, a visual representation of practical necessity versus emotional caution. Lily had been unusually quiet during dinner, picking at her mac and cheese with the distraction of a child processing complex adult emotions. "Daddy," she said suddenly, looking up from her math worksheet with the directness that always caught him off guard. "Are you going to work with the fancy lady?" David set down his coffee mug, giving her his full attention. "How do you know?" "About that? I heard you talking to yourself in the shower. You do that when you're worried about big decisions." Lily's matter-of-fact observation made David realize how transparent his internal struggles had become. "She's nice, and she made you smile more than you have since Mommy moved away." The simple statement hit David with unexpected force. He had been so focused on the professional implications of Isabella's offer that he had missed the personal dimension, the way their collaboration had awakened parts of himself he had thought were permanently dormant. Working with her had reminded him of who he had been before divorce and single parenthood had narrowed his world to manageable but limiting dimensions. "What do you think I should do?" he asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's perspective. Lily considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "I think you should do what makes you happy and helps other people at the same time. That's what Mommy always said made the best choices." That evening, David called Isabella and accepted her partnership offer, a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable. What he didn't anticipate was how quickly their professional collaboration would evolve into something more complex and potentially dangerous to the emotional equilibrium he had fought so hard to achieve. Their first official project together was a corporate gala for a biotechnology firm, an event that required the same kind of complex logistics that had saved the Ashford wedding, but with the added challenge of coordinating international speakers and highly specialized catering requirements. David threw himself into the work with an enthusiasm he hadn't felt in years. His mind finally engaged at full capacity, his skills applied to challenges that required everything he had learned during his previous career. Isabella proved to be an extraordinary partner, her creative vision perfectly complemented by his operational expertise. They developed a working rhythm that felt almost telepathic, each anticipating the other's needs and filling gaps before they became problems. Their late-night planning sessions in Isabella's Pike Place market office became the highlight of David's weeks, conversations that ranged from event logistics to philosophy, to the kind of personal revelations that emerge when two people discover they can trust each other with their vulnerabilities. It was during one of these sessions, 3 weeks into their partnership, that Isabella finally asked the question David had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "What really happened with your previous career?" she said, looking up from the vendor contracts they had been reviewing. "I know you coordinated humanitarian logistics, but I also know there's more to the story. People don't walk away from careers they're brilliant at without compelling reasons." David set down his pen, suddenly aware of how quiet the office had become, how the sounds of the market below had faded into distant murmurs. He had known this moment would come, had prepared various versions of the truth that revealed enough to satisfy curiosity without exposing the full complexity of his past. "I was good at my job," he said finally. "Too good, maybe. I could organize supply chains in war zones, coordinate relief efforts in natural disasters, make impossible logistics work under conditions that would break most people. But I was so focused on being excellent at work that I forgot to be present." At home, Isabella waited, sensing there was more beneath the surface of his carefully measured words. When Lily was born, I took 2 weeks off and then went right back to managing a relief operation in South Sudan. When she took her first steps, I was coordinating earthquake response in Nepal. When she said her first word, I was in a refugee camp in Jordan, solving other people's problems, while my own family learned to function without me. The confession carried weight that went beyond simple career regret. David was describing the kind of fundamental misunderstanding of priorities that destroys marriages and damages children. The trap that captures well-intentioned people who mistake professional achievement for personal fulfillment. Sarah, my ex-wife, she tried to make it work, David continued. She rearranged her own career, took responsibility for everything domestic, became essentially a single parent while married to someone who was never actually present. When she finally asked for a divorce, she said she felt like she was competing with the entire world for my attention, and the world was winning. Isabella absorbed this story with the same careful attention she brought to complex event planning, understanding not just the facts but the emotional architecture that had led to such devastating choices. "So you walked away from everything," she said, not a question but a statement of recognition. "I realized that being excellent at helping strangers meant nothing if I couldn't be present for the people who mattered most." When the divorce was finalized, I made a promise to Lily and to myself: no more jobs that required me to choose between professional success and being her father. Everything else became secondary. Isabella nodded slowly, finally understanding the full scope of the sacrifice David had made and why her partnership offer represented such a complicated proposition. She was asking him to risk the very balance he had fought so hard to achieve, to trust that he could excel professionally without repeating the mistakes that had cost him his marriage. "What changed your mind about my offer?" she asked. David smiled, thinking of Lily's wisdom and the way Isabella had knelt to eye level with his daughter, treating her with the same respect she gave to billionaire clients. "I realized that the right kind of work with the right kind of partner might actually make me a better father instead of forcing me to choose between success and presence," he said. "And I realized that some risks are worth taking, especially when they come with the possibility of building something meaningful." The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that went beyond professional collaboration. Isabella felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that their partnership was becoming something more complex and potentially transformative than either had initially intended. But it was the phone call that interrupted their conversation. That changed everything. The call that would test not just their professional partnership, but their growing personal connection in ways neither could have anticipated. Isabella's phone rang with the sharp persistence of emergency, displaying a number she didn't recognize but answered anyway out of ingrained professional habit. "Isabella Moreau," she said, her voice automatically shifting into the crisp authority she used for business calls. "Ms. Moreau, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with Seattle PD. We need to speak with you immediately about an investigation involving Moreau Events and several of your recent clients." The words hit Isabella like ice water, her mind immediately racing through possibilities and implications. David watched her face change, saw the color drain from her cheeks as she struggled to process whatever she was hearing. "What kind of investigation?" Isabella asked, her voice steady despite the fear David could see in her eyes. "Money laundering, fraud, and possibly racketeering," Detective Martinez replied. "We have evidence suggesting that several high-profile events you planned were used to facilitate illegal financial transactions. We need you to come in for questioning tomorrow morning, and we strongly recommend you bring an attorney." Isabella sank into her chair, the phone call ending with arrangements she barely registered, her mind reeling with the implications of accusations that could destroy everything she had spent her career building. David moved to her side without conscious thought, his instinct to protect and support overriding any consideration of the complications this crisis might create for their new partnership. "What can I do?" he asked, the question emerging automatically from years of crisis management experience. Isabella looked up at him, tears threatening but not yet falling, her composure hanging by threads that were stretched to their breaking point. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how this is possible, or who could have used my events for illegal activities, or how to prove my innocence when I don't even understand what I'm accused of doing." David knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his with the same gentle authority he used to comfort Lily during nightmares. "Then we figure it out together," he said simply. "Whatever this is, whatever's really happening, we solve it the same way we solved the wedding crisis. Step by step, problem by problem, until we find the truth." Isabella stared at him, recognizing in his steady presence the same calm competence that had saved her most important event, but also something more personal and powerful. He was choosing to stand with her not because of professional obligation, but because of something deeper, something that neither of them was ready to name, but both were beginning to feel. The investigation that was about to consume their lives would test not just their professional skills, but their growing trust in each other, their ability to face crisis as partners rather than individuals, and their willingness to risk everything for the possibility of building something worth fighting for. But in that moment, sitting in her office with Seattle's lights twinkling beyond the windows, and the weight of accusations she didn't understand pressing down on them both, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that she wasn't facing this crisis alone. The Seattle Police Department's downtown precinct felt like a different planet compared to the elegant world of high-end event planning. Isabella sat across from Detective Sarah Martinez in an interview room that smelled of industrial coffee and institutional disinfectant, her hands folded carefully in her lap while her attorney, Marcus Hartwell, reviewed documents with the methodical precision of someone who charged $800 an hour. David waited in the lobby, officially present as Isabella's business partner, but actually there because he couldn't bear the thought of her facing this crisis alone. Lily sat beside him, working on homework with the focused determination of a child who had learned to adapt to adult complications, her yellow backpack filled with activities for what might be a very long day. Through the glass partition, David could see Isabella's posture remain perfectly straight, despite the stress he knew was eating away at her composure. She wore a navy blue suit that projected competence and respectability, but he had watched her change outfits 3 times that morning, seeking armor that might protect her from accusations she still didn't fully understand. Detective Martinez spread photographs across the metal table, images from various Moreau event celebrations over the past 18 months. The Ashford wedding was there, along with a tech mogul's anniversary party, a pharmaceutical heiress's birthday celebration, and a diplomat's retirement gala. Each event had represented months of planning and millions of dollars in execution, but now they looked sinister under the harsh fluorescent lighting of the interview room. These 7 events generated over $40 million in documented transactions, Detective Martinez explained, her tone professional but not unsympathetic. "Our financial crimes unit has identified patterns that suggest systematic money laundering, with funds being moved through vendor payments, inflated service charges, and fictitious supplier contracts." Isabella studied the photographs with the same analytical intensity she brought to venue layouts, searching for connections she had missed during the actual planning process. Each event had been meticulously organized, every vendor vetted, every transaction documented according to her standard protocols. The idea that someone had used her work to facilitate criminal activity felt like a violation that went beyond professional sabotage. "I personally approved every vendor, every contract, every payment," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the implications of what she was seeing. "My business depends on absolute transparency and accountability. I don't understand how this could have happened without my knowledge." Marcus Hartwell leaned forward, his silver hair and expensive suit projecting the kind of legal gravitas that came from 30 years of defending Seattle's elite. "Detective, my client has provided complete financial records, vendor lists, and communication logs. If illegal transactions occurred through these events, Ms. Moreau was clearly an unwitting facilitator rather than a conscious participant." Detective Martinez nodded, consulting notes that David couldn't see from his position in the lobby. "We believe that's the case, which is why you're here for questioning rather than under arrest. But someone with intimate knowledge of your operations, someone with access to your systems and relationships, has been using Moreau events as a front for substantial financial crimes." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Someone she trusted, someone close enough to manipulate her carefully constructed business relationships, had betrayed not just her company, but her personal integrity. The violation felt deeper than theft or fraud. It was an attack on the foundation of trust. That made her work possible. "We need to identify who had the access and opportunity to orchestrate these transactions," Detective Martinez continued. "We need names, relationships, anyone who could have manipulated your vendor network or payment systems." Isabella closed, her eyes mentally reviewing the small circle of people who had sufficient access to her operations. Her assistant, Margaret, who had worked with her for 5 years. Her accountant, Robert Chen, who handled all financial transactions, but was David's uncle and had come recommended with impeccable references. Her technology consultant, Elena Vasquez, who maintained their computer systems and client databases. But it was the fourth name that made her stomach clench with the recognition of devastating possibility. Jonathan Pierce, her former business partner, who had sold his share of Moreau events 8 months ago after philosophical differences about the company's direction. Jonathan, who still had administrative access to several vendor accounts. Jonathan, who had argued repeatedly that their ethical standards were unnecessarily restrictive and potentially profitable opportunities were being ignored. "There's someone," Isabella said quietly, the admission feeling like tearing open a wound that had barely healed. "My former partner, Jonathan Pierce. He had complete access to all our systems until 8 months ago, and he maintained relationships with many of our vendors even after leaving the company." Detective Martinez made notes with renewed interest, recognizing the shift in Isabella's demeanor from confused victim to someone who had identified a viable suspect. "Tell me about Mr. Pierce and why your partnership ended." Isabella glanced through the glass partition at David, drawing strength from his steady presence before diving into a story she had never fully told anyone. Jonathan Pierce had been brilliant, charming, and completely immoral in ways that had taken her years to fully understand. Their partnership had been built on complementary skills, her creative vision and organizational abilities paired with his financial acumen and networking capabilities. Jonathan saw every client relationship as an opportunity for additional revenue streams, Isabella explained. He pushed for ventures that were technically legal, but ethically questionable. Kickbacks from preferred vendors, inflated charges for services that were never actually provided, using client events to facilitate business deals that benefited us personally rather than serving their actual needs. "You objected to these practices," Detective Martinez observed, recognizing the pattern of ethical conflict that often preceded business partnerships dissolving. "I threatened to report him to regulatory authorities if he didn't cease those activities," Isabella admitted. "Our contract included moral clauses that gave me the right to buy out his share if he engaged in practices that compromised the company's integrity. He took the buyout rather than fight the accusations, but he was furious about being forced out." Marcus Hartwell leaned back in his chair, seeing the defense strategy crystallizing around Isabella's cooperation with the investigation. "Detective, it sounds like Mr. Pierce had motive, means, and opportunity to use my client's business for illegal activities, particularly as a form of revenge for being expelled from the partnership." Detective Martinez nodded, already formulating the next phase of the investigation. We'll need you to provide all documentation related to Mr. Pierce's departure, including financial records, access logs, and any communications that might indicate ongoing contact with your vendor network. The interview continued for another 2 hours, Isabella providing detailed information about her business operations while David entertained Lily in the lobby with quiet games and whispered stories. When Isabella finally emerged from the interview room, her composure intact but her emotional reserves clearly depleted, David stood immediately and moved to her side with the natural protectiveness that had become his default response to her distress. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly, aware that Lily was listening with the acute attention children applied to adult conversations that might affect their security. "They believe me," Isabella replied, relief evident in her voice despite the exhaustion that made her lean slightly against his shoulder. "But proving Jonathan's involvement is going to require cooperation that puts both our business and our personal safety at risk." Marcus Hartwell emerged from the interview room carrying a briefcase filled with documents and wearing the expression of someone whose day had become significantly more complicated. "The police want you to help them build a case against Pierce by cooperating with a controlled investigation. They need evidence of his ongoing access to your vendor network and proof that he orchestrated the illegal transactions." David's expression hardened as he processed the implications of what the attorney was describing. "They want her to wear a wire to set up meetings with someone who's already demonstrated he's willing to commit serious crimes for money." "Not exactly," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested David's concerns were well-founded. "They want to monitor her communications and have her attempt to elicit admissions from Pierce about his activities. It's less dangerous than undercover work, but it's not without risk." Isabella looked between David and her attorney, seeing the protective concern in both their faces, but also recognizing the stark reality of her situation. Cooperation with the investigation offered the possibility of clearing her name and salvaging her business, but it also meant confronting someone who had already betrayed her trust and might be willing to escalate that betrayal into something more dangerous. "What happens if I refuse to cooperate?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "The investigation continues without your help, but your business remains under scrutiny indefinitely," Marcus explained. "Your accounts stay frozen, your reputation remains under a cloud of suspicion, and you have no control over how the case develops. Cooperation gives you agency in determining the outcome." Lily looked up from her coloring book, sensing the tension in the adult conversation, even though she couldn't understand its implications. "Daddy, is Miss Isabella in trouble?" she asked with the directness that always cut through David's attempts to shield her from complexity. David knelt beside his daughter's chair, choosing his words carefully. "Miss Isabella needs help solving a problem that someone else created. We're trying to figure out the best way to help her." Lily considered this explanation with the seriousness she brought to all matters involving people she cared about. "Can we help her the same way you helped her with the wedding? By being really smart and working together?" The simple question crystallized something that had been forming in David's mind since the investigation began. He looked up at Isabella, seeing in her expression the same recognition of what their partnership had become, and what it might accomplish if they approached this crisis with the same collaborative intensity they had brought to event planning. "Yes, sweet pea," David said, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. "I think we can help her by being smart and working together." The plan they developed over the following week was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Isabella would contact Jonathan Pierce under the pretense of needing his help with a lucrative but ethically complicated client request, something that would appeal to his willingness to blur legal boundaries for financial gain. The conversation would be recorded with police monitoring from a nearby location, but Isabella would be essentially alone with someone who had already demonstrated his willingness to commit crimes. David threw himself into the operational planning with the same intensity he had once applied to humanitarian logistics, mapping out communication protocols, safety procedures, and contingency plans for every scenario he could imagine. His protective instincts, dormant since leaving his previous career, reactivated with a force that surprised him in its intensity. "You don't have to do this," he told Isabella during one of their late-night planning sessions in her Pike Place market office. "We can find another way to clear your name, rebuild your business from scratch if necessary." Isabella looked across the desk at him, surrounded by the detritus of their investigation. Financial records, police reports, and surveillance equipment that Detective Martinez had provided for their cooperation. Her face showed the strain of the past week, but also a determination that reminded David of why he had been drawn to partner with her in the first place. "I've spent 10 years building Moreau Events into something I could be proud of," she said. "I won't let Jonathan destroy that because I'm afraid of confronting him. And I won't let him use my work to hurt other people while I hide from the consequences of his choices." David recognized the steel beneath her composed exterior, the same quality that had made her successful in a competitive industry and had enabled her to salvage a $10 million wedding during a hurricane. But he also saw the vulnerability she tried to hide, the fear that this crisis might cost her everything she had worked to achieve. "Then we do it together," he said simply. "Not just the planning, but the execution. I'll be close enough to intervene if something goes wrong." Isabella started to object, to point out that his presence might compromise the investigation or escalate the danger, but David interrupted with gentle firmness. "I didn't drive through a hurricane to save your wedding just to abandon you when the stakes got higher," he said. "We're partners in business and in this. That means we face the difficult things together." The meeting with Jonathan Pierce was arranged for neutral territory, a coffee shop in Belltown with multiple exits and enough ambient noise to mask the recording equipment Isabella wore. David positioned himself at a corner table with a clear view of their conversation, ostensibly reading a newspaper while actually monitoring every gesture and expression for signs of danger. Jonathan Pierce arrived precisely on time, his appearance as carefully curated as Isabella remembered. Expensive suit, perfect grooming, and the kind of confident smile that had once made her believe he was someone she could trust with her business and her future. He kissed her cheek with the familiarity of their former partnership, his manner suggesting he viewed their meeting as a pleasant reunion rather than a potential trap. "Isabella, you look wonderful," he said, settling into the chair across from her with the easy grace of someone completely at ease with deception. "I was surprised to hear from you, but pleasantly so. I've been hoping we could put our past differences behind us." Isabella forced herself to smile, remembering Detective Martinez's coaching about maintaining natural behavior while eliciting incriminating statements. "I've been thinking about some of the things you said before you left the company, about opportunities I might have been too conservative to pursue." Jonathan's eyes sharpened with interest, recognizing the opening he had been waiting for since their partnership dissolved. "I always knew you had the vision to see beyond conventional limitations. What kind of opportunity are we discussing?" Isabella launched into the fabricated scenario they had developed. A wealthy client with questionable financial sources who needed event planning services that could facilitate certain discrete transactions. She watched Jonathan's expression change as he understood the implications, saw the moment when his moral flexibility overcame any lingering caution about their past conflicts. "That's exactly the kind of client relationship I tried to help you develop," Jonathan said, leaning forward with renewed enthusiasm. "The key is structuring the vendor payments and service charges to accommodate the client's financial requirements, while maintaining plausible documentation." As Jonathan described techniques that matched exactly the money laundering patterns the police had identified, Isabella felt sick to her stomach. This was someone she had trusted with her business, someone whose advice she had once valued, revealing himself to be capable of systematic criminal activity with casual confidence. I still have relationships with most of your vendor network, Jonathan continued, apparently oblivious to the legal implications of what he was admitting. The systems I established for managing those relationships remain in place, even though you changed the access codes after I left. It wouldn't be difficult to coordinate the kind of arrangement your client needs. Isabella realized he was confessing not just to money laundering, but to unauthorized access to her business systems. The technical crimes that had enabled him to use her company for illegal activities without her knowledge. Detective Martinez had explained that such admissions, clearly recorded, would provide the evidence needed to prosecute him while clearing Isabella of suspicion. But it was Jonathan's next statement that revealed the full scope of his betrayal and the personal malice that had motivated his crimes. I have to admit, there's some satisfaction in using your precious ethical standards against you, he said, his smile becoming predatory. You forced me out for wanting to maximize our business potential, so I found ways to maximize it without you. The irony is that your reputation for integrity made it easier to manipulate vendor relationships and client trust. The casual cruelty in his tone, the revelation that her professional destruction had been not just collateral damage, but an intended outcome, hit Isabella like a physical blow. She struggled to maintain her composure while processing the magnitude of Jonathan's betrayal, the systematic way he had weaponized her own business relationships against her. David, watching from across the coffee shop, saw Isabella's distress and recognized the signs of someone approaching their emotional breaking point. He stood and moved toward their table, ostensibly heading to the bathroom but actually positioning himself within intervention distance if the situation escalated. Jonathan noticed David's movement and followed Isabella's glance toward him, his expression shifting from confident confession to wary calculation. "Who's your friend?" he asked, suddenly aware that their private conversation might not be as private as he had assumed. Isabella realized the moment of maximum danger had arrived, the point where Jonathan's growing suspicion might transform him from confessor to threat. She stood smoothly, gathering her purse with hands that trembled only slightly despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Just a colleague," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you for the consultation, Jonathan. I'll be in touch about how to proceed with the client." But Jonathan had recognized something in the dynamic between Isabella and David, some quality of protective attention that suggested their relationship went beyond casual friendship. His expression hardened as understanding dawned as he realized the conversation had been too convenient, too perfectly designed to elicit admissions about activities he had kept carefully hidden. "You're wearing a wire," he said, his voice low but carrying across the coffee shop with surprising menace. This whole meeting was a setup. Isabella backed toward the exit, her training from Detective Martinez taking over as she sought to de-escalate the situation while maintaining the evidence they had gathered. "Jonathan, I don't know what you're talking about. I should go." But Jonathan moved to block her path, his facade of civilized manipulation dropping to reveal something desperate and potentially dangerous underneath. "You sanctimonious bitch," he hissed. "You destroy my career and then try to destroy my freedom. Do you have any idea what prison would do to someone like me?" David reached them in 3 strides, interposing himself between Jonathan and Isabella. With the fluid efficiency of someone whose protective instincts had been honed by years of crisis management. His voice, when he spoke, carried the quiet authority that had once commanded supply chains in disaster zones. "The conversation is over," David said simply. "Isabella is leaving now, and you're going to let her walk away without any further drama." Jonathan looked between them, recognizing in David's stance and tone the presence of someone who would not be intimidated or manipulated. For a moment, the coffee shop held its breath as 2 very different kinds of men measured each other's resolve, each calculating the costs and benefits of escalation. It was the arrival of Detective Martinez and two uniformed officers that resolved the standoff, their presence transforming the confrontation from personal drama to legal procedure. Jonathan's shoulders sagged as he realized the full scope of the trap he had walked into, the systematic way his confessions had been documented and witnessed. "Jonathan Pierce, you're under arrest for money laundering, fraud, and unauthorized access to computer systems," Detective Martinez announced, her tone professional but carrying a note of satisfaction. "You have the right to remain silent." As the arrest proceeded, Isabella found herself shaking with delayed reaction to the stress and danger she had just navigated. David guided her to a quiet corner of the coffee shop, his presence solid and reassuring as she processed what had just occurred. "It's over," he said quietly, his hand steady on her shoulder. "You did it. You got the evidence they needed, and now Jonathan can't hurt you or anyone else." Isabella looked up at him, seeing in his face the same calm competence that had saved her wedding, but also something deeper and more personal. Throughout the investigation, through every moment of crisis and uncertainty, he had been there, with exactly the support she needed, professional and personal combined in ways that made her feel truly partnered for the first time in her life. "We did it," she corrected, her voice still unsteady but filled with genuine gratitude. "I couldn't have managed any of this without you." The legal aftermath unfolded over the following months with the methodical precision of institutional justice. Jonathan Pierce pled guilty to multiple felonies in exchange for a reduced sentence, his cooperation with recovering stolen funds, allowing Isabella to reclaim her business assets and reputation. The investigation cleared Moreau events of any wrongdoing, and several clients who had canceled contracts during the crisis returned with apologies and renewed bookings. But it was the personal aftermath that proved most significant for both David and Isabella. Their partnership, forged in crisis and tested by danger, had evolved into something neither had expected when they first met during Hurricane Miranda. They found themselves building not just a successful business, but a life together that honored both their professional ambitions and their personal priorities. David's daughter Lily proved to be the catalyst for acknowledging what had grown between them. 6 months after Jonathan's arrest, she cornered her father in their apartment kitchen with the kind of direct questioning that had become her trademark. "Daddy, why don't you just marry Miss Isabella?" she asked, looking up from her homework with the innocent pragmatism that only children possessed. "You love her, and she loves you, and she makes you happy. Plus, she has a really nice office with good snacks." David nearly choked on his coffee, the casual way his 7-year-old had identified and articulated what he had been struggling to understand about his own emotions. "What makes you think Miss Isabella loves me?" he asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's perspective. Lily rolled her eyes with the exasperation of a child explaining something obvious to a particularly dense adult. "She looks at you the same way you look at me when you think I'm sleeping. Like you're the most important thing in the world." The simple observation hit David with the force of recognition. Over the months of their partnership, through crisis and success, and the daily routine of building something together, Isabella had become essential to his life in ways that went far beyond professional collaboration. She had integrated herself into their small family with natural grace, remembering Lily's school events and favorite foods, contributing to bedtime story readings with dramatic flair that made his daughter giggle with delight. More importantly, she had never asked him to choose between his career and his daughter, instead finding ways to enhance both relationships through the flexibility and creativity she brought to every challenge. Their business partnership had evolved into a life partnership that honored his priorities while expanding his possibilities. That evening, David called Isabella and invited her to dinner at their apartment, a simple request that carried weight. They both recognized, as they sat around the small kitchen table that had become their regular meeting place, with Lily chattering about her day and helping serve the meal David had prepared, Isabella realized she had never felt more at home, anywhere in her life. After Lily went to bed, they sat on David's modest couch with cups of tea and the comfortable silence that had developed between them over months of shared challenges and victories. It was Isabella who finally addressed what neither had been willing to name directly. "Your daughter asked me today if I was going to be her stepmother," she said, her tone carefully neutral despite the significance of the subject. David set down his teacup, giving her his full attention. "What did you tell her?" Isabella smiled, the expression transforming her face with joy and vulnerability combined. "I told her that would depend on whether her father asked me to marry him." David laughed, recognizing the gentle pressure behind her words and feeling grateful for the directness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. And what if her father was terrified of making the same mistakes that destroyed his first marriage? Isabella reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers with the naturalness of a gesture repeated countless times. "Then I would remind him that some risks are worth taking, especially when they come with the possibility of building something meaningful." The proposal, when it came 3 weeks later, happened during a routine business meeting in Isabella's office, surrounded by vendor contracts and event schedules. David looked up from the timeline they were reviewing for an upcoming corporate gala and realized he couldn't imagine planning any future that didn't include the woman sitting across from him. "Marry me," he said simply, the words emerging without preamble or elaborate preparation. Isabella blinked, setting down her pen as she processed the casual way he had just asked the most important question of both their lives. "That's not exactly the romantic proposal most women dream about," she observed, though her smile suggested she wasn't actually complaining. David grinned, standing and moving around the desk to kneel beside her chair with the same natural grace he had shown during every crisis they had faced together. "Isabella Moreau, will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life delivering whatever you need, whenever you need it, through storms and calm weather alike?" The proposal was perfectly them, practical, heartfelt, and grounded in the partnership that had brought them together. Isabella said yes while laughing and crying simultaneously, recognizing that she had found not just love, but the kind of equal partnership she had never believed was possible. Their wedding was small and elegant, held in the Crown Ballroom of the Meridian Grand Hotel, where they had first worked together to save someone else's celebration. Lily served as flower girl with the kind of solemn dignity she brought to all important occasions, walking down the aisle in a yellow dress that matched her bright smile. Charlotte and Felipe Ashford attended as honored guests, their own marriage having been strengthened by the story of how their wedding crisis had brought David and Isabella together. The ceremony was officiated by Detective Sarah Martinez, who had been ordained online specifically for the occasion and who declared their union legal with the same authority she had once used to arrest Jonathan Pierce. Marcus Hartwell served as best man, his expensive suit and courtroom gravitas adding unexpected dignity to the celebration. But it was the moment during their first dance when David whispered in Isabella's ear that she realized how completely their lives had been transformed by the storm that had first brought them together. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice audible only to her despite the guests surrounding them on the dance floor. "For what?" Isabella asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "For teaching me that showing up during storms is just the beginning," David replied. "The real magic happens in building something beautiful from what survives the chaos." Isabella smiled, understanding that he wasn't just talking about their relationship, but about the life they had constructed together. A business that honored both their talents, a family that included his daughter as naturally as if she had been born to both of them, and a partnership that had proven itself capable of weathering any crisis through commitment, trust. As they danced to music played by the same string quartet that had performed at the Ashford wedding, surrounded by friends and family who had supported them through crisis and celebration alike, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had begun with a desperate text message during a hurricane, a plea for help that had drawn a delivery driver into the most important rescue of his life. But the real rescue, she realized, had been mutual. David had saved her wedding and her business and ultimately her faith in the possibility of finding someone who would choose to stay through difficulties rather than abandon ship when challenges arose. In return, she had offered him the chance to use his abilities fully while remaining present for his daughter, to build professional success that enhanced rather than threatened his personal priorities. Together, they had created something that neither could have achieved alone, a life that honored both ambition and love, that proved it was possible to build a business and a family simultaneously, and that demonstrated the transformative power of choosing to show up for each other through every storm that life might bring. 3 years later, David still drove through Seattle, delivering hope to people facing crises, though now he did it as the co-owner of a successful event planning company rather than as an hourly employee. Isabella still orchestrated celebrations that brought joy to other people's most important moments, though now she did it with a partner who understood both the demands of her work and the importance of being present for the daily moments that created the foundation of their shared life. And Lily, now 10 years old and wise beyond her years, still asked direct questions that cut straight to the heart of adult complications, though now she did it as the daughter of 2 parents who had learned that the best answers to life's challenges came through facing them together rather than alone. The delivery that had started as an emergency response to a stranger's crisis had become the foundation of a life built on mutual support, shared dreams, and the understanding that sometimes the most important journeys begin with someone willing to drive through a storm simply because another person needed help. Their story had become part of the folklore of Seattle's event planning industry, told and retold as proof that extraordinary things could emerge from ordinary moments when people chose courage over safety and partnership over independence. But for David and Isabella, the real magic wasn't in the dramatic rescues or crisis management that had brought them together. It was in the quiet daily choice to show up for each other, to build something beautiful from whatever storms life brought their way, and to remember that love at its best wasn't just about finding the right person, but about choosing to become the right partner for someone worth keeping. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.